Hey everybody, I am Damien DiCarlo. Welcome to Making a Geek. Today, my guest on the show is a geek in the world of computers, gaming. He is the owner of a website publishing company, is a co-host on the podcast Antic and Eaten by a Gru. He is also the writer of the book Terrible Nerd, which is available in stores now. Please welcome Kevin K. Savetz.
Hello.
How you doing, Kay?
Great. I'm excellent.
Good to see you. Thanks for being on the show. First off, how are you doing with the pandemic and everything going in lockdown? How have you and your family been doing?
We're fine. Everyone is, we're healthy. That's the big thing. And, mentally, okay, mostly okay most of the time. It's a really good excuse to, at first it was like, oh, great. We'll stay in. We're going to quarantine. We're going to watch movies. We're going to play video games.
Because there's so much you can do, though.
We're gonna hunker down and stay healthy. And
right.
Yeah, it's been 5 months now. It's getting a little
getting the itch to want to leave now.
Yeah, I'm not going to. I really, cause my itch to have a ventilator down my throat is much lower. So.
And if that wasn't enough, you guys had a bit of a crazy crowd recently of protesters in Portland, right?
Every night, still, it's like the 80th night of protests in Portland. Yeah,
and I heard riot to live here. Some parts of downtown don't even look the same anymore.
It's not as bad as the media covers it. I mean, I went down there a few days ago just to check it out. All of the protests and the problems are really within like a 3-block radius, most of it. Okay. So they make it sound like it's some of the media make it sound like it's a terrible hellhole destruction down there. And it's just like the 3-block area around the Federal Building that people were protesting or are protesting. So I think that what people are protesting for is well worth their time and energy. And I applaud most of them for the way they're handling it. A few bad actors here and there, but
well, now that I've officially depressed my audience, let me ask you about your publishing company.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about it. I know just a bit of what I've learned in your book, but I don't know much more other than, just what's written. Tell me a little bit about how it started and what you do.
Sure. I used to be a freelance computer technology writer. I wrote for any computer magazine, but there used to be a thing called computer magazines.
Remember that.
It's real sad. I wrote for any computer magazine pretty much that you would see on a newsstand, because there used to be a thing called a newsstand, and where you could go buy these things called computer magazines. And I had a great time doing that for 13 or 14 years. I wrote about just anything. The editor would give me an assignment like, okay, I'm going to learn about some, sometimes it was really within my wheelhouse. I mean, literally computer power user would be just like, we want you to write, how do people like take a computer and put like an acrylic window on the side of it? And just like, this is like when it was really new to have a fancy modded out PC. That kind of idea was so like, okay, so like bought an acrylic window and like went to my buddy's house who like had all the tools and like, we're going to do this, so and sometimes it would be really boring businessy stuff like setting up a storage area network and things like that. So I loved it because it was something that was literally different every week, and I was always learning things about computers, which was a lot of fun.
So do you tend to build computers? Is that what you do as a hobby, or?
No, I used to know how to build computers. And then I didn't do it for a decade. And then I tried to build a Hackintosh a couple of years ago, and it was the most stressful thing I had ever done.
What is a Hackintosh?
It's a PC. Basically, you buy PC components, and then you buy specific components that will fool the Macintosh operating system into thinking it's running on a real Mac.
So it's a PC modded to think it's running in Mac?
It's a PC. So the macOS operating system from Apple wants to run on Apple components only, right? It doesn't. You can't buy a PC and run macOS on it. They don't want that. Right. Except in a Hackintosh, you're buying the specific components that will um, that can fool the Mac OS into thinking it's running on a legit Apple computer. And that's
And
called.
what would be the benefit of something like that?
It's supposed to be fun, although I did not find it fun. Like I said, found it very stressful. It would be cheaper than buying a Macintosh hardware for the same specs. You can like get a totally tricked out PC motherboard and with all the memory in the world and then
Essentially, you
running
could
Mac on
save
it.
a ton of money by putting yourself
You
through
could save
some
money,
misery.
and then also I thought it would be fun too because like I said, I hadn't built a PC in a few years. I'm like, well, let's see what it's all about. And everything had changed enough, and I didn't read I was just like, I dove in too fast without without watching the YouTube videos and reading the manuals.
And so this is something that you're good at. I mean, you do this just for fun. I mean,
building PCs, I'm no longer good at. No, for fun. All right. So back to your question before. So I was a freelance technology writer. I did that for a long time, and then I decided to transition into making websites. Well, I was already making websites. I just to publish on websites.
publish them. Right?
Rather than, it was like the computer magazine world was dying, and frankly, writing for every day for 13 years, I was ready to move on. So so I decided to create a website publishing business, and now my company, which is called Savetz Publishing because I'm not creative, we have more than 100 little websites. We come up with the ideas for the sites, we create the content for them, we put ads on them, and or offer downloadable things that people can buy on the sites and see what happens.
So, and you've been running this business for, you may have mentioned this, or I apologize, but how long have you been managing this?
This has been more than a decade now.
So I would assume you have to keep up with all the changes that have happened, all the different ways to design a site, all the different, I mean, there has to be mass changes that you've gone through in your company. Just
absolutely. Yeah, no, things have changed from, we started using CMSs that no longer exist anymore. And then we switched to WordPress, which has gone through just 1,000 different small versions that we have to keep up with. And then of course online security has changed, and sure, it's like riding on a river, and you just kind of have to see where the river's going today. What's Google decided is the right thing to do. What's PayPal doing today? What's the new security problem?
And how did you start something like this? Is someone just suggested? You wake up one morning and say, "Hey, I want to start my own web publishing business." What kind of started that for you?
Someone. So should I turn on the light here? So I was doing the writing thing, and a friend of mine was just like, "You're an idiot." Like, oh, actually, he wasn't my friend. It was a guy who was a business guy who he became my friend. The day I met him, he's this fancy pants business guy, and I told him, I'm a freelance technology writer, and he's just like, "You're an idiot." I'm like, "Hi, nice to meet you too." And he's just like, "You need to have a business with passive income. You should do websites that make money while you sleep." And I was just like, "Okay, crazy man." But I mean, I did have some websites, that personal hobby sites mostly, and I did have some AdSense running on them, and they did make me money. I'm just like, well, he's right in that these websites, if I take a week off, they continue to be websites and people continue to visit them. So I decided at that point to try to transition out of, do less writing and see if I could do more websites that made money while I sleep. It sounds like such a scam, but
doesn't it? Oh, I think you're immediately. So what kind of websites would you host or publish?
My sites are have many sites that offer free printable documents and templates. There's an umbrella site at freeprintable.net which lists all of them, but basically free coloring pages for kids that parents can download and print. There's printable business cards for small business owners, templates for contracts. I have a site that lets you send faxes. So you need to send a fax to whatever, your doctor, your insurance company or something. You don't have a fax machine because who has a fax machine anymore? So you go to faxzero.com, you can upload a PDF, you can send a fax, it costs nothing. It's free or $2 depending on what your needs are. And so I have all these little sites that provide useful little services to people. And I guess he was right. I was an idiot. So because it worked out. And so now I'm doing that.
So when you publish these websites, who were the people that were monitoring that website? That would be you.
Monitoring the website?
Yeah, anyone that would be up there to update any sort of, is there any sort of administrative controls that you would do for these websites while they were already up?
Well, I mean, me and eventually when I had a team, I have a team, we created the sites and we created the content. So it's not like we're taking user submitted content. This is all high quality stuff that we have created. So my ultimate job is to, if I have one job as owner of this company, it's to vet the content that my team has created before it goes online, to make sure it's not garbage. A lot of,
okay, I get you now. Well, how big is your team that you have?
Only 4 employees.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a nice operation. It's not too big, and I'm sure it can be overwhelming at times, but for 4 people, I mean, I would imagine so, especially nowadays.
It's the perfect size, and we all work from our own homes, so I don't have to deal with anybody. So when I'm in introverted geek mode, I can just, hunker down. And also, when you're having a pandemic, it's we didn't have to change our office situation.
Yeah, suddenly everything just stays the same for us geeks.
Exactly, yeah.
I noticed your shirt,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that you might be a bit of a gamer. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, okay. I feel like gamer is a word that has a lot of baggage. For some people, I don't, own an Xbox or a modern PlayStation. I am an old school gamer. I'm into Atari computers, the 8-bit computers line of computers that launched in 1979, and they stopped selling in 1992. One of my podcasts is about that, and I am into Infocom text adventure games.
Tell me, I mean, in my very, very young years, I'm trying to remember what Infocom is. I do know that it was a computer-based game. Which one is that?
So Infocom is a company, one of many I wouldn't say many, one of a few that had text adventures or interactive fiction. So these were games that were completely text-based, and it might say on the screen in text, "You are standing outside of a White House with a boarded front door. You are standing next to a mailbox." And you can type "open mailbox," and it says "opening mailbox reveals a leaflet." And you can type "take leaflet," and it says, you take the leaflet, read leaflet, and it tells you what is written on the leaflet. So it creates basically an entire world that you can explore, and mostly it ends up being puzzles to solve. How do you get into the house, right? And once you're in the house, how do you find the secret trap door?
So
look, there's a dungeon under the house.
Essentially, we're not using joysticks. So this is just typing.
This is typing. This is because the first game in this company ended up making about 40 games in its lifetime, and this company, when these games were first created, the computers it was created for were mainframes that did not have graphics. So if you're going to have something fun to do on the computer, it could not do graphics. So these were things that you typed on. They might have a roguelike or something with ASCII graphics and Zork.
So we had to basically use our imaginations at this point, is what you're saying, it's interesting because that's my one complaint with most, I'm going to be careful when I say this, most modern games. When I was on my Retro Game Night podcast, we always would talk about how games essentially today kind of hand it to you. You're not really working for it. So whatever it is, if it's a puzzle, if it's a certain part of the game, and of course with the internet now, you can find almost any way around whatever it is that you're stuck on. But back then, I mean, I remember in the 80s, 90s, when you're playing a video game, you had to really work for that, and there was no way of looking that up. You had the wonderful ability to buy a magazine, which would give you tips.
Yes,
that was about as far as you could get.
With the Infocom games, they had a unique their system was they had books called Invisiclues, which were books with the hints to the puzzles written in invisible ink. So
you're saying like with the marker,
with the little marker. Yes,
remember that?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it would say whatever. How do I kill the troll? And there'd be little boxes, and you could highlight the first box, and it would say have you tried using the sword? And eventually it started off real general, and then it would get to very specific. You need to get the gem out of the box, and then throw it at the troll's head, and that's how or whatever it was. I made that up. So yeah, that was the hint book way of doing it, before Google.
So how was that growing up and playing a game like that? Obviously you didn't have any graphics. You were using just your intellect and your ability to word process. I mean, I'm sure that was fun in itself. You were able to, I don't know if I want to say choose your own adventure, but you could navigate with words and commands how you would go. How did that affect you as a young person playing a video game like that?
That was a kind of game that appealed to me. I mean, of course, there was games with graphics on the 8-bit computers. You could play your Pac-Man and your Frogger and all that sort of thing. But I liked the text-based games, honestly, because I could play them at school in math class when I wasn't at the computer. You're just like, you're sitting there and you're just like, how do I get the through that door, that with the locked door? I don't have a key, so you can puzzle it out. It was a good distraction during classes that I didn't want to pay attention to.
You didn't have to worry about any sort of loud sound effects or noise
right. I didn't have to have a computer. You're just like thinking about like how, what's the solution, to figure out the puzzle.
And it was kind of like a work in progress, really. It wasn't something that you would just beat in a day or...
No, some of these games could take weeks or sometimes months to solve, depending on how hard they are. Some of them are less fair than others, but my buddy Carrington and I are playing all of the Infocom Text adventures for our podcast, Eaten by a Gru. In fact, I just finished the last Infocom Text adventure that I hadn't played yet, which was a horror game called The Lurking Horror, which is a Lovecraftian style horror game. And literally, I had this. We haven't recorded the episode yet, but there's monsters in the school, and you have to like figure out how to get by them and defeat them and whatnot. And literally, I was sleeping. I was it was like 4 a.m. or something, and my brain was just like told me the answer to one of the puzzles. Like, oh, here's how you defeat this monster. And it's like your brain is like working on it when you don't you're in the shower or whatever. And I woke up, I just like couldn't wait to get to the computer and see if my solution was the one that the author had intended.
That's what made it. Yeah, exactly. You're thinking first when you're playing it as a gamer. I'm going to use that term gamer. I don't know if we called it that in the 80s and 90s, but a gamer where you're trying to beat it, you're trying to win, or your goals to win. But as an adult or looking back, you're like, let me think like the programmer. Let me think like the author. What is he thinking here? And I could see that that's what you were doing. You were probably contemplating that. And I would say that those kind of games would be definitely more of a thinking kind of a game. I mean, you're kind of left thinking when you're not playing it.
When the programmer, when the game designer does it right, I feel super smart for figuring out their puzzle. I haven't done anything. I mean, they created a puzzle, and I figured out their puzzle, hopefully. But I end up feeling like, I'm smart. I got past the troll. I made it into the secret chamber. Like, okay, but it's really more of there's a level of satisfaction that I get from that I have never gotten from jumping at the exact right time off the platform to get to the mushroom.
Yeah. I totally get that. I get
that people love those games, and I'm not disparaging them, but I stink at them. I've always stunk at them, and more than that, I don't find them that fun. So
platforming games like Super Mario aren't your cup of tea.
Not my thing.
Yeah. So I would say you're kind of more, if I may be so presumptuous, puzzle games, dungeon crawlers, RPGs.
Somewhat. I like roguelikes. There's another game called NetHack that I have been playing since 1989, and I've never won it once.
Still trying since 1989.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to happen. So yeah.
But, yeah. There's some games that was the reason how I started Retro Game Night. That we had a bunch of friends come over. We would just hang out for the night, and we would want to play video games. But when you're in your 30s and you're starting to figure out that there's a sense of nostalgia with these old games, I kind of want to pop that on and let's try it. You start realizing so many games that you left unfinished that you just couldn't beat, whether it was timing or just difficulty. So I joked about it where I would keep doing this until I got old, because like really old, I just would keep playing these games because there's so many that were so hard. So I would say that's kind of fun. I mean, even during this lockdown and pandemic, to take advantage of your time to really catch up with, your old catalog and finally get to check off your list that you were able to beat it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does your family play games too, like the old ones, Infocom and Atari?
No, my daughter is 13 and she doesn't care about Infocom games at all. I can sometimes sometimes get her to sit down for some Star Raiders or some Pac-Man or Frogger or something like that. Yeah. She enjoys them.
Was that a deal breaker for you when you found your significant other, that you have to like video games if I'm going to be with you? Was that part of the deal?
No, I mean, no. She just no, that she doesn't hate. None of them hate games. It's just not their go-to activity.
May just not be their thing.
Well, my daughter she loves games actually, but she's not playing the games I'm playing. She's playing Minecraft, and whatever the Sims. She loves the Sims.
Yeah, those are very, very good. I mean, and there's a sense of satisfaction with those too, but I think it appeals to a different kind of audience, different generation. But I'm wondering, in your opinion, what it would be like. I mean, you had the experience with your daughter trying some Infocom games, but you feel that would be collectively the experience for every young person diving into these old games.
These old games are not for modern players. They're really not. I care. My buddy who I podcast with and I discuss this. It's like, are these games something that someone could pick up today and enjoy? And the truth is, for most of them, I think that would be a stretch. There are a bunch of modern interactive fiction game makers today who have picked up the mantle and are making this type of game, but making them better. I mean, basically, after 30 years of using 30 years of knowledge that have been created in the game making space. So there are new text. There are contests where people create new games every year, and some of them are incredible. And I don't want to say they're easier, but some of them aren't puzzle based. The Infocom games were very puzzle based. Some of the new modern interactive fiction are not as puzzle based, but even the ones that are fair. Are just more fair, and I don't want to say easier. I don't want to say fair. Like you said, they gave some of the games just to give it to you.
Right.
I don't want to say that at all, but just like they're just more fair. They don't expect you to take these leaps of logic that are no one would ever make.
Were some of the games back then in Infocom and like let's say Atari, were they impossibly hard? My memory is a little foggy on how hard they were.
Some of them are absolutely impossibly hard.
Because yes. I know that was a thing. Japanese designed it that way, that they found joy in the fact that it was near impossible where you want to slit your wrists. And it for me, when I covered a lot of the NES games, was I mean, it's just impossible.
Right.
Impossible.
Some of
Even
them are possibly hard. The one I just played now, Lurking Horror, I found very fair. And there was a couple of puzzles that were real tricky, and but like once I figured it out, it was like, okay, but back in the day, if you were paying $40 for a game, which might be like equivalent to say $80 or $90 in today's money, man, you wanted some value out of that, right? And so if you could literally take 6 months to finish a game because you were puzzling through all the puzzles and the mazes and stuff,
then you got your money's worth.
yeah, you get
Right.
your money's worth. I mean, potentially, or you hated it, you put it away, and you put it away after a week because it was too hard. But
Throw it across the room.
You may have got, yeah, you may have gotten your money's worth in that, in a massive level of satisfaction after a year or whatever of finishing the game.
So I would say that would be that is the level of the satisfaction you get, is when it is hard and you have to work for it and you crack the code, so to speak, or you finally beat it. Whereas I feel the games today are, while they're not all bad, they're just, I find myself saying, this would have been just a fine, like a good movie to watch. Like, why did I have to invest my mental power to really I did very little much in the game is what I would feel. And the games back then, you'd have to ignite your imagination. You'd have to use memory skills. You would have to do a lot, sometimes homework, if you want to look it up in a magazine or a book.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of activity involved with that. Whereas nowadays, I feel it's, like I said, it's handed to you. You get the experience. Sometimes it is cool and surreal, whatever it is, whether it be VR or, a brand new game from the latest consoles. But I feel like the games back then just, it kind of, it made a different kind of person out of it. And I feel like maybe the people today are maybe a little bit more transformed in a different direction. And I feel that was interesting to cover on my podcast, where it was just, I kind of miss those days, but I think that you can't fully appreciate it unless you're from that era.
That'd be true.
Now, I noticed that in I believe it was your podcast, I don't remember now, that you are dubbed as an Atari historian.
Yeah. On my other podcast that we haven't talked about yet, it's called Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. And for it, I have interviewed more than 400 people now who did things with the Atari 8-bit computers. The designers of the machine, programmers, people who published the magazines, people who wrote the books, a lot of programmers and a lot of company CEOs and managers and things around this ecosystem that was built around this particular popular computer system.
So with that kind of a history involved, I'm sure is that all just from your experience growing up or did you do a lot of research with this?
Sure. I mean, I fell in love with this machine, the Atari 800, when I was in middle school. My dad brought it home and it was like my first love. And I never stopped loving it. A lot of people, you whatever, you had your game, you sold it, you gave it away at the flea market or whatever, and then 20 years later you have nostalgia and pick it up another one, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. With this particular machine, I never stopped having fun with it. I still have my dad's original Atari 800. So what was the question? I'm sorry, I was waxing this.
No, just wondering like how that played out for you with the fact that you are dubbed a historian of Atari. Was that just from experience, or is it a lot of research involved?
I think it's all. I mean, I became a de facto historian after doing all these interviews and talking to these people, many of which had really never been interviewed before, and just finding stories about what it was like to be part of the early microcomputer age, when having a computer on your desk was literally an amazing, astounding thing.
So tell me a little bit about your podcast, specifically Antic. So you would interview people that were in the industry that made the games, or who were these people?
Sure. I mean, I've interviewed many different types of people. The first person I interviewed was a man who was the publisher of a computer magazine devoted to the Atari computer. Just so we talked about magazine publishing and hiring writers and all that. And I've talked to CEOs of game publishing companies like there were Synapse published all these popular games, and I talked to the CEO and what was it like? What were you thinking about as a CEO? I've talked about the programmers who created some of the most popular games. I've talked to people who wrote the books. I have a library of books about Atari computers, and I found some of those writers and talked to them. I talked to people who created voice synthesis hardware and software. And devices, there was this early trackpad thing called Koala Pad, where basically you could draw on this pad and the picture would show up on the screen. It seems completely, we all have that now in the trackpads and things, but this was a new one. So I talked to the man who invented that.
And how would you meet people like this? Would this be at conventions or?
Primarily research online, like, okay, who here this Koala Pad was interesting. It was an interesting device. Who created it? And then I find them.
Just track them down.
Track them down.
And how would that feel? I mean, you have such rich history with these games that it would now these are the people that you're meeting people that essentially were responsible for your young childhood, growing up
Sure.
and playing these games. I mean, you must have had 1,000 questions.
Sometimes, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes the questions, I mean, my basic question was, wow, thank you,
Right.
for creating this neat thing. Sometimes the question is a comment of, I'm sorry, I pirated your thing. I didn't buy your software.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, forgive me now after all these years.
Right.
I totally get that. I recently, actually, one of the last shows we did for our retro game night, we interviewed the makers of the X-Men animated series, and that was a huge thing for me personally. I felt like what you're describing. I had 1,000 questions. I had so much to say, but at the end of the day, it was just a big thank you. Thank you for what you've done, because you don't realize what you've done for my childhood, whether it's video games, TV shows, that plays such a huge role, where for that person, it's a job, and they did their very best with it. And yet for you, it played out very differently. So,
right. And for some of them, some of them loved it and they love to talk about it. And for some of them, it was a job. Absolutely. And they're just like, why do you want to talk to me about this stupid thing I did in an office when I was 20? Yeah, I programmed that game, they didn't pay us very well, the end. I mean, so some of the people, it was a job. And for some of the people, it was the best job they ever had.
I know that some programmers and some gamers, not gamers, just the programmers that make the games I know some stories we covered. I believe one of them might have been one of the Metroid games, where the teams that would design these games would not sleep for days to push, to meet the due dates and the demands. Right. I would say that almost any person that is a designer or some sort of creative person is going to lose sleep over this. So I know that there's some programmers that when they say, oh, I just whipped that out. I mean, for us, that is a lot of time and dedication that we don't see behind closed doors.
Sure.
And they do that constantly. And that's just a turn and burn for them. But, for us, we see
for the Atari games, most of these games were made in a very different environment before crunch time was invented. Certainly they had deadlines, but a lot of these games were made by one person. It wasn't a team. It didn't require sound engineers and musicians and whatever. It was just a guy, usually a guy, who was programming and figuring it out by himself. So, which largely the game industry has moved away from, although certainly there are indie games now, and that, I think some of those indie games and 1 and 2 people team games gets back to the original early ethos of some of those early games that I enjoy.
How did you feel when they started releasing other consoles? When did you drop off, Kay? When did you say I'm done? I'm done with these games now. I mean, because you had 2600, right? Was that after 800?
I never had a 2600. I had the Atari 800. I had an Intellivision. That might have been when I dropped off. No, and then I had a PC. I had a PlayStation 1, which my wife and I bought basically because we wanted to play Area 51. It was just like
It was the thing. I remember.
It was the thing. Yes. We bought, I mean, I had some other games, but we bought it just to play Area 51, which we did endlessly. So yeah, I don't know, stuck in that area, that era.
How did you feel when arcades were becoming a thing? I mean, were you not into that when they came out in the 80s?
I was into it. Yes, absolutely.
And those were games that weren't always made for console, right? There were some favorites that would only be on the cabinet, right?
Absolutely. And some of them, many of them ended up being ported to the computers, and sometimes the ports weren't that great. Our arcades were great. It was social. You could hang out with your friends and loud environment, free of adults and
away from the adults, right?
Yeah, right.
You spend all your allowance every last dime.
Yeah.
Did you feel that era is really what made the games that we know today? I'm going to say this by saying my own answer first, but I feel that the influence in arcade in the industry back in the 80s and 90s, I think is what tailored the games that we know today, because I think a lot of the games that we saw back starting with Atari 800 were a lot of the thinking games, and then it became I just want to put a quarter in and bash some guy's face in a combat game or a fighting game. And I started to feel that changed things with gaming. Would you agree?
I think so. I think the types of games that have been available in arcades over the years has certainly changed. It started off with you put in your quarter and see how far you could go, right? How many times can I get the frog across the up to the top of the screen? How many dots can I eat?
$800 worth.
Yes. And then, I mean, eventually it went into what I think you alluded to, a lot of the fighting games, which was never my thing. But, some of those were basically, quarter eaters. You're playing the Simpsons and you want to keep going. All the quarters, all it takes, to go a little bit farther. Gauntlet, that sort of thing. And some of those games, I mean, I have some friends who own arcade games now. They have them in their basements, whatever. I have a couple. And some of those games aren't fun when it's not costing you real money.
It's just, it was part of the excitement was I'm running out of quarters.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
slowly, but I can't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Gauntlet is a classic. It's a fun game, and you're shooting, the baddies and going down the levels of the dungeon. But man, when you don't have 25 cents riding on it, it's a little less fun. And then moving on, I don't know. Then I feel like games, if you go into arcade today, largely pre-COVID, when you went to arcade, largely what I see a lot of games there are redemption games, which is a whole nother kind of game where you put in your token or your quarter, and you're hoping to get out tickets that you're going to go get a stuffed animal for.
Yeah, you're right. Redemption games, and I feel that while it's not bad, I've had my fun. I feel that it doesn't. I don't know. I have a real problem with redemption games when it comes to just the only thing that is available. I guess what my problem is, I do miss an old school arcade. So I feel like when I'm there and playing these games for a ticket or not even nowadays, now it's on a card, but like you get these points, and I don't feel that I am playing a game that I want to go home and keep playing. Like I feel like it was subjective. It was just for taking a date out, or it was having fun with someone, and then that's it. And so you go back to do the same thing again. But what I liked about arcades back in the day was this is where you would go to challenge your friends. This is where you would go to also use certain references, whether it be comic books, movies, like, hey, there's this game based on that movie or this comic book. This is exciting. I remember playing, I think it might have been one of the Alien games based on the film. So when I was a kid, that was exciting because I loved the movie, and now I get to play it. And so for that, it was more it had more of a theme, I guess you could say. And I think some games still, arcades, they still have something like that when it comes to a Dave and Buster, any of those kind of places.
A racing game is a racing game, and that's always going to be fun if you're into racing games.
Yeah.
Right? But
I guess what I also feel was distinctive with each of these games, specifically in the 80s and 90s, was they all were so different from each other. And you had a game like Dragon's Lair to Gauntlet. I mean, like polar opposites as far as graphics, but I feel that a lot of the games that I see are all kind of the same. You get a Mario Kart arcade game, okay, and it's very much like the motorcycle game that's right next to it. And the graphics aren't much different, and I feel like it's just a template being used.
There's a homogenization, to be sure.
Right.
And then back in the 80s or whatever, you play your game and there would be a huge screen and a unique controller, be it a wheel or whatever, and it was a unique experience that you couldn't really take home. You could play games at home, but you got a little screen and the graphics were a lot more blip bloop. And now, I mean, your game experience at home is equal to or as good as what you're going to get at the arcade. So
pretty much, yeah.
So what's the benefit of the arcade? And there still is, because there's a guy doing pouring beers and your friends may be there, but it's a different experience. It's not as separated as it was.
Do you think that console games have taken away that sense of nostalgia for arcades? Like you were just saying, like that. Essentially, you did say that, but I mean, like, you go to an arcade now and you can't not only compare the game, but you can't take it home, and you don't really want to, because there's something better at home. There's something more graphically enhanced.
Here's what I'm worried about for people who are really into today's modern games. You got your Xbox and your PlayStation 23 or whatever they're up to now. I'm worried how their nostalgia is going to work out, because I can always play Frogger on my Atari 800. I pop in the cartridge and it works. But people who are playing the games today, in 10 years and 20 years, when those services go offline, and then suddenly the servers aren't there to play Minecraft or to download the latest updates for whatever game you're playing. I'm worried that a lot of the games that people enjoy playing today are going to get lost.
There's no nostalgia, in my opinion, with them.
Well,
it's a turn and burn situation.
There will be. They're not nostalgic for you, but if you're 13 or 20 years old or any age, and you are super into this game, this game, when you're an old guy at 40 or 50, you're going to have nostalgia for what you did as a youth, right? And you're going to want to go back and play those games, and maybe those games aren't going to be there because the company went out of business and it took its.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, things change once servers go down, and suddenly you want to relive that, but you can't.
Right. Yeah.
In which case, then I feel bad for people later to be nostalgic. It will be a lot more difficult, and I think that part of that is the experience of being online and MMOs or whatever.
Right.
That to me is one of those type of games where. Yeah, they are time suckers, but it does kind of emulate that experience old school to me, where it was like you got into something, you got into it deep. But I think that might be a little too far, which is why I don't play those, because it's a bit more immersive to the point where it takes away from your everyday life. Whereas I feel the games back, 80s, 90s, it was just a little bit more. It was in small doses, but you still worked for it. It didn't take up your entire life.
Right. Yeah. And
so. I would say,
yeah, and both are valid for if what you're into. I mean, now that type of game might be called a casual game, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Have you ever made a video game? I forgot to ask you this earlier. I don't know if you did.
I nothing good. I did when I was a kid. I did a couple of text adventure games that I created. One of them still. I managed to not lose over the years, and so it's out there on GitHub if someone wants to play it. But it's not very good.
You just never got into wanting to actually publish, or because I know there's a market for that, right? Even nowadays.
Oh, sure. No, I mean, it was never a.
You didn't feel that
I
strongly
enjoyed
about it.
I wasn't just not that good at it. I put my efforts into other things, like writing, and I have been a competent programmer, but not so good a programmer that I felt like I could, create a
Were a lot of
create and
these
sell a
games
game.
based on the 800 engine? Is that what you were using?
Yeah, that and the Apple II.
Okay. Yeah, and so there goes my next question answered. I guess it's just so much work and time that if you're not a naturally born talented programmer into it, then I guess it would be a lot harder and to buy out that time, because it takes a lot of time to do it.
Yeah.
All the design, all the I mean, at this point, I would say it's a lot easier, maybe because you don't have to put in, music work or, all these other things that you would have to have done in the later generations, but still a time sucker.
Sure. And people who still enjoy creating games for those old computers, it's much easier now than it ever was before, because you can code the game on your modern PC or Mac, cross-compile it. It takes literally a fraction of the time that it used to. And there's all sorts of tools and things that were unavailable to the people using original hardware at the original time. So, yeah.
Do you have a favorite video game that you've ever played?
Depends on my mood, I guess. There was one on the Atari 800 called Jumpman, which was a platformer, which I've already disparaged platformers, but this was a good one, because I think it had 30 different levels with different puzzles on them. We have to figure out how to pick up the little treats that you're supposed to pick up on every level, and it was a particularly strong platformer.
So that was the only platformer and the last you'll ever play.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but it is one of my favorite games. What about you? What's your favorite game?
Oh man, I think I would answer the same way. It's kind of on the mood, but I think for me, it was an RP. It's going to be the typical answer you've probably heard from guys my age. I think I'll give you two. So one is Final Fantasy VII for the PS1.
Sure.
And that was only because that was my first role-playing game I've ever played. I mean, unless you want to count Zelda, but and that would be my other choice, would be the very first Legend of Zelda. And that for me was about the experience of working for it, like to the 10th degree. This was now you're not only working for it on a normal, like a platform-based game or trying to beat the bad guy. This is you're trying to beat the story, but you're trying to live through it, and you put a lot of energy into that, and that's a lot of time thinking about it when you're away from the game. So for those two games, the music too made a big thing for me, and I think that may differ with you, is you didn't need that to judge the game to be amazing, but for me that was very important. I think I grew up in the 80s and 90s where it was very profound to have really good video game music, and Zelda and Final Fantasies were known for that. I think that played a huge thing for me. So music and gameplay would probably be the most important things for me.
Sure, makes sense. A friend, when I had my PS1, a friend bought me, like, as a birthday present or something, Final Fantasy VII, and I tried it. I couldn't get into it. I don't know. Wasn't my thing. I gave it a small effort, but
the bar was raised a little high for you in a different way. I think
maybe, or just wasn't. Yeah, or just didn't click with me. I don't know.
Yeah, and that says a lot about the generations. And I was born in the 80s, but I think that kids like me growing up, when I did try an Atari game, whether it be 800 or 2600, it was cool, but I don't think it was as cool as it was for you. And that's what made the huge impact that it did. And then it just so happened to be then my mark was during the late 90s.
Sure. Yeah. No, it was amazing that existed at all for me. For you, so like, oh, here's another game. Oh, this one's kind of old.
Right. You came at the dawn of the age where
we went from playing tic-tac-toe and tag too. Oh, we could sit inside
And it
and play
really
video
wasn't
games.
that much of a gap. Like I was born in the 80s, but you're not that far off from me. And it
No.
changed so drastically that it was just amazing how we progressed in video games to the point now where it'll take me to my next question. I'm dying to ask you, how does a person like you that loves Infocom, Atari 800,
Mhm.
what do you think about VR games?
Um, I don't know. Yeah, I was gonna. You said it's come so far, and I was just thinking like, and where is it going to go next? I mean, screens are getting bigger, screens are getting smaller, and yeah, and then there's VR and Oculus and all that stuff, and I don't know.
Does it scare you?
Does it scare me?
It
No.
practically scared me. Okay, so when I tried it, it was so unreal that I think it was something I had dreamt of. One of my favorite films when I was a kid was the original Tron movie,
Uh-huh.
and a
Sure.
sequel I liked as well. But that was like the concept I was thinking of was, wouldn't it be great to be stuck in a video game and do what you normally know what to do, but you're there? And so I feel like the same concept with
And then you
it.
put on your VR headset, and you're like, no, that's a bad idea,
Right,
right?
right. So I put it on. I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like. It's
Yeah.
crazy. And I had, I can't remember which game it was. Might have been one. It was one of the Resident Evil games that came out for the VR for the PlayStation 4, and it was a little too real to where it wasn't scary. It was just I felt almost there was a form of PTSD it came away from it,
Mm.
where it was like I lived it, and did a too good of a job of tricking my brain into thinking that this was actually happening at some point in my life, my real life. So it was just one of those things that I had to ask, because if you had tried it, if it did anything weird for you like it did for me.
Well, honestly, I mean, when I've tried it, it's been at conventions and things where there's something on display that you can try. And I remember particularly playing this one game. It was sort of a Tetrisy thing. I put on the VR headset and get into the little roped off area so you don't whack into people. And it was some sort of putting boxes into other boxes. I don't know what the game was called. Um, and I mean, it's the first time I'd played it. I wasn't good at it. I probably could play it for 10 hours and still not be good at it. But I I felt more than the technology, which was amazing, and 3D and sorry, uh, and looked amazing. I felt like I was in a public place and people are watching me, and I knew I sucked at it, and it felt like being a kid in the arcade playing Dragon's Lair, and with other people around. It's like, oh, I'm not good at this. I'm going to get to the second stage and then die, and then, but I know that the guy who can get to the last level is here, snickering at me. It felt,
Yeah.
it was more of a social thing,
Social
of
thing.
so
Yeah.
an embarrassment, just like, oh, I can play video games at home on my Nintendo or my Atari 800, and if I stink, then that's fine.
No
That
one has to watch
no
you
one has to know
except
except
for
for my
Twitch
kid,
streamers.
and she knows I stink. So, but yeah, doing it in a public place with the VR headset and everything, it was just like almost embarrassing. I
I
don't know.
put my VR headset on my dad once, and that was just kind of like my father. He comes from the 50s, so to
Yeah,
see his face was just priceless.
yeah.
So for me, I'd like to see what it does to people of a different era, different age, different way of thinking. And if, like I said, if I can barely handle it, I just wonder what other people feel like from another generation. So like you said, we don't know where it's going to go from here. Technology is growing every day. There's more and more things we're getting, and I'm personally excited to see where we go. But it's not
Mhm.
something that I think is going to be very easy for us nostalgics to just jump in on.
Right.
It's been a pleasure, Kay. Before I go, I wanted to make your book known here, which was very good. Terrible nerd. Tell me what it's about. Just a quick wrap up. What it is.
This is basically a little memoir. It's my story about growing up a geek in the '80s. Talk about playing playing with the Atari computers, and different projects I worked on. It basically is a little memoir about what it was like to be one of the first generation to have a computer that fit on a desk.
You were a pioneer in the experience of gaming, really. I mean, maybe not in design, but you are the type of people that fed the imagination for the creators today. Because while you weren't the creator of it, like we said, for most of them, it was just a job. But for you, what it did to you on a personal level, those are the type of critiques then later that made the games that were greater with each decade. So I appreciate the book. I gave it a whirl and I read it. It's very good. Where can folks find this? Is this because I got this copy from our mutual friend Greg Goebel, who designed and composed the music to Making a Geek, by the way.
Excellent. Cool. He is a incredible musician, and you were lucky to have his
fantastic guy.
work. Yeah,
Very talented. Hopefully after COVID's done, I was hoping he could perform where we do our live show. So we'll see if we can do that.
Fun. The book is available on Amazon and or your local friendly neighborhood bookstore.
Fantastic. Definitely read it. Really great read if you're a nerd of computers and gaming. Highly recommend it. Before we go, Kay, where can people find you? Where can folks find you on social media?
Sure. On Twitter, I am at I'm at K Savetz. I recently changed my Twitter name, KAYSAVETZ. And I am at the Eaten by a Guru podcast and Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
You can find me on Instagram at Damien_DeCarlo, Making a Geek _podcast. Kay, fantastic. I'd love talking with you. We could talk for hours, but I wish you and your family well during COVID. Stay safe.
You too.
Don't forget to hit subscribe and do a little bell, and we'll see you guys next time. Stay calm and geek out. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.